So hi, everybody. My name is Doug Williamson. I'm going to be your guide today for this session. Just real quick, here's today's agenda, just so you have it in front of you and know the timing of what we're going to do. We really want to keep this open. Feel free to ask questions in the chat or raise your hands through Zoom. We really want this to be interactive. We want to make sure you're getting the most out of this. So a lot of this will be a demo, especially towards the end. So hopefully you'll get to see the data in action and how you can use the open data platform that the city's put together. So let me just, again, welcome you. As was mentioned before, the primary goal here is to raise awareness about open data and its relevance in government transparency and accountability. Hopefully, you'll leave today's session with an improved understanding of open data, its history and its mission, and with some skills for navigating the open data platform itself. So as I said, my name's Doug Williamson. I'm an open data ambassador. I like to think of open data ambassadors as reference librarians for open data. Our job is to guide you through our data holdings, or the city's data holdings, I should say, and answer any questions that you might have. I do work full-time for a city agency, and one of my responsibilities is to be the open data coordinator for that agency. So what that means, in that role, I liaise with folks just like yourselves. We're responsible for publishing our data holdings to the open data platform. We update it and maintain it, publish new data sets as they become available. And again, it's about education, right? So hence why I'm here today, just to inform the public on how to better leverage the open data platform. So again, feel free to use the chat. That's the best way. We'll be monitoring that as we go through. So as was mentioned, this is brought together through a number of different organizations. The Office of Analytics, New York City Analytics, at the Office of Technology and Innovation from the city plays a big role in this, and a big role in the Open Data Week, as does our partners at BetaNYC, which is an advocacy group. So we're really sort of indebted to them and what they provided here. Just a little backstory about open data and some of the principles about open government. A lot of this stems from an organization called the Sunlight Foundation. Some of you may have heard of them, despite the fact that they're no longer in existence. But the Sunlight Foundation is based on this metaphor of an architectural window. And the idea being with a window is that when you open the window, the sunlight shines in through wherever room you're in, right? And the idea with government is that by opening this window, right, by shedding light into the government workings, the public gets a better understanding of government activities. So that's really, what open data is all about, right? The promise of open data goes a little further than that, right? It's about information that allows people to take action on their own behalf, right? So now the city is opening up, and the public has access to that information, and they can take some action. So, we use this term open data a lot. We hear it a lot. I like to think of open, people tend to think of open in this context as an adjective, right? The data itself is open. I like to think of it more as a verb, right? The city government, my agency, for example, is opening up, right? We're opening up and giving access to this information. And I like that analogy a little better where it's a verb. The idea here, again, is all about transparency, accountability, and value creation, right? That's why open data is so important. Open data is all about making government data accessible to the public, right? Because of this tying it to the term data, I think a lot of people feel like it's a recent phenomena, something that's come about in the last 10 years or so, maybe 20 years. But as we're going to see in a second, that's not true, right? There's a long history of open government that open data is a part of. So even if you are an experienced user of open data, and you might feel like it's a fairly recent event, there is quite a long history. But let's pause for a second and just talk about the present. We have this image here that we're looking at in the area of Union Square, 14th Street. And really, open data is meant to cover all aspects of city living, right? So we have data about taxis and limousine commission. We have data from the Department of Buildings about inspections. We have 311 data about calls for for service requests, whether it's noise or potholes or streetlights. There's information from the Department of Health. There's information from the police department. There's information about property value and things like that from the Department of Finance. So really, again, it's this broad spectrum, right? Every facet of city life is really encompassed in open data, right? Kay mentioned before, baby names and dog licenses, right? So it really runs the entire spectrum. So, just out of curiosity, and feel free to respond in the chat, how many of you have used open data? I'm hoping some of you, it looks like by some of the comments, some of you already have, I guess. Maybe also include what your favorite data set is, or what data set you use most frequently, just to give us a sense of what's going on. So it's one thing to consider that there's a lot of data, open data out there that you may or may not be aware of. A lot of you probably woke up this morning and the first thing you did, or one of the first things you did before you went to the office was, check the weather out, right? And believe it or not, that's open data. The federal government, the National Weather Service, has these APIs, these data feeds that they distribute or open up to the public. And companies leverage them in their weather apps. So that's all publicly available data, right? So we use open data all the time, and we might not even be aware of it. So keep that in mind as you're thinking more about open data. So as I was saying, open data isn't necessarily a new thing, right? Or open government isn't necessarily a new thing, right? Long before we had things like big data and data analytics, there's this strongly held belief that information created by the government really belongs to the taxpayers, right? So folks such as yourselves. In New York City, the idea that government activity should be open traces its origins back to the 19th century. In the 19th century, the progressive era reformers sought to remedy the ills of corruption, right? Some of you might have heard of Tammany Hall and the political machine in New York City. The progressives wanted to sort of open that up, right, to get some insight into what was going on. On the screen right now, we have the city record, and this goes back to 1873. And I have the current version of the city record, which is published now online, right? So in 1873, it was published, on paper and distributed. Now it's digitally online, but conceptually, it's still the same thing, right? This gives public access to things like public hearings, court notices, the contract and procurement processes of the city, right? What companies are getting awarded contracts. So all of that is open for anybody to see. Again, back in 1873, this was, done on paper and published that way, but it was the first step in really opening up the inner workings of the government to the public. Fast forward several decades to the 1960s, there's freedom of information legislation, which you might know as FOIA, F-O-I-A, or FOIL, F-O-I-L, being passed at the federal level. This happened in 1967, the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level, and then subsequently in 1974, it was passed at the state level. And the idea behind the FOIL legislation is that any government information should be made available to the requester. So what that meant was that the public had the opportunity to ask for specific data sets from the federal and state governments. Now, this was particularly helpful for the media, journalists, things like that, if they were writing stories, they could request information from the government. And this still goes on to this day. So basically, again, any information could be requested by the public, and it would be provided if appropriate and available. And again, this was back in the late 60s, early 70s, depending on whether we're talking about the federal or the state level. More locally, so the real monumental event, though, happened for us in New York City in 2012 when the open data law was signed. And this is really significant because going back to FOIL, remember, this is required that the member of the public request this information directly, so that they needed to make the request formally. In 2012, though, with the passage of Local Law 11, this meant that the data is public by default, meaning the city would proactively publish their data and share their data, meaning the public didn't need to ask for it. It meant now that the data was openly available, right? They just needed to search for it, and then it would be there. So this was really a game changer. Also significant in this Local Law 11, 2012, is that this isn't a policy or a recommendation, right? That's sort of subject to the political whims. This is codified in the law, right? So that this is a guarantee now that the public will have access to this information in perpetuity, regardless of the administration or the current political climate, right? So this is really important for the public. Part of this was the creation of the New York City Open Data Platform, and was mentioned at the top of the session. There's over 3,000 data sets on this open data platform. There are over 100 open data coordinators across the city at city agencies, offices, and commissions. Everybody is represented there, or all the offices are represented in agencies. The website gets 1 million visitors each year, right? Which is quite miraculous. So it is a very popular website, and it's popular because of the participation of city agencies, which has been mandated by law. And again, these offices and agencies publish over 3,000 data sets, which again is all free to the public. So we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about the open data site, how we access data, what's available, and how we can work with the data once we find what we're looking for. So what we're looking at here is a screenshot of the landing page on the open data website. As you can see, there's a menu on the top, which we'll talk about. But the main thing is the search bar, which allows people to just dive right in, right? You can enter keywords or tags that you think might be relevant to your question and search just, just that easy. Or like I said, you can use the menu on the top and click on the data, for example, the data option, the data menu, and it will take you to this page here where we can see several things. We can see data sets by agency. So if you know, for example, that you're interested in building inspections, right, then you want to jump right to the Department of Buildings and see about their elevator inspections or whatever the case may be. There's other ways to browse the data. We can browse by category, right? Maybe you're not exactly sure what the agency who owns it is, but what broad category it falls in, right? Maybe you're interested in so I have some slides on searching. I think what I might just do is just jump right over and do the search live so you can see it. So I'm just going to search for 311, and this will take a look at the all of the open data holdings and look to see if there are any keywords or tags associated with the data sets that include 311. So as you can see, I get this list returned from the search results. We can further filter them by category or type or data collection. But as you can see, the first one is really the one that I'm looking for, right? This is the 311 service request from 2010 to present. So if I click on that link, that takes me to something called the primer page. And the primer page really is our first foray into this data set. It's an introduction to what the data set is all about. And as you can see, we have the title at the top, and then there's this description here below it. So, it talks about the pandemic here, but if I click on it, this basically tells me what it is. It's all 311 service requests from 2010 to present. This information is updated daily, right? So that in 2 sentences gives me quite a bit of information, right? And it tells me exactly what I'm looking at. As we scroll down on the page, there's more information. It tells us when it was last updated. It was updated, this morning, as a matter of fact, right? It tells us the agency responsible, when it was updated or how it's updated, when it was made public. It also gives us information about the number of views and the number of downloads, right? So this is obviously quite a popular data set. If we scroll down further, we can see more content related, what's actually in the data set. We can see, for example, that there's 32.5 million rows in this data set, right? Each row in this data set is a 311 service request, right? So since 2010, there's been over 32 million service requests, right? Quite a big number. There's 41 columns or variables of information. And, if we look further down, we can see exactly what those columns are, right? So this is a listing of all the columns with a brief description, and it tells us what data type each one of those columns are. So again, we're getting more information about what the data is and how potentially we could use it. Further down, there's a preview of the data, so we can, get this tabular view to see what the contents look like, right? So this is just a screen, not a screenshot, a snapshot of what the data looks like. As you can see, there's this row count on the bottom right here, 32,517,179 records, right? So lots of information about that. That's all helpful again as we begin our journey, right? So let me just jump back to the slides here. Quick note about the 311 data, right? 311 requests come in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's accessible in over 175 languages with information related to 3,600 government services. For those of you that don't know, 311 is accessible via phone, whether it's cell phone or a landline. There's a web-based 311 page that you can access. Also Skype, Twitter, Facebook, and mobile apps. So truly an open access to this service. So this is just some screenshots of what we already talked about. I just want to go through some key things here. The one thing that I didn't show, and I'll jump back to this, is do I understand the data set well enough to start using it? And one way to do that is by looking at this data dictionary. So I'm going to jump back to the actual website. And there's this data dictionary here. It's a link to a Excel file. And this is, let me open it up. Well, I'll just jump back to the slides. So this data dictionary is a rich source of about the contents for each field. So let me just ask a question. Has anybody ever heard the term metadata? You can raise your hand. I see those with their cameras on, nodding your heads up and down. Does anybody want to respond in the chat what metadata is? There we go. Somebody responded, data about data. So this is this document, this data dictionary is metadata, right? It's going to describe exactly what's in the contents, right? So for every column, for example, it tells us what the name of it is. It gives a column description, and then it gives us information about, what values we can expect to see in there. For example, we have this column in the 311 data set called agency. And we can see that it's an acronym or an abbreviation of all the agencies, right? So there's this listing of what those acronyms are, right? Some of them may be obvious to people, but to others, they might not be, right? In which case, there's another column called agency name, which actually spells it out, right? So this data dictionary explains in rich detail what we can expect to see in this data. Right, so even down to things like the format of the dates, right? So that way, depending on where you're from, you might expect it to be in a certain format, and this will answer the question of what it looks like, right? Does it include the timestamp, for example? All of that's included, right? Okay, so just to recap, we should be asking some questions before we begin, right? The first one, is this the data I'm looking for? And the way we answer that question is by reading the title and the description. The second question is this data sufficiently current, right? And then we can verify that by looking at the last updated date. We can review the data documentation, right? To answer the question, do I understand the data set well enough to start using it? right? You'd be surprised how many questions we get as open data coordinators about, information in the columns. And all of that is really already answered in this metadata, in this data dictionary. So really that's a great place to start. Before you dive into data, look at the data dictionary to make sure you understand the data set. And then is the data set too large for me to use as is, right? The way we do that is evaluating the size of it. That's another common question we'll get, especially when we're talking about data sets that are really large, like the 311 data set, right? People will download it and it's 32 million rows, and they'll quickly run into like row limitations, for example, in software like Excel. And that's a problem for their analysis. So, if they, were aware of how big it was at first, they might have taken some steps to filter the data, for example, to get a smaller data set, and that would have helped, would have caused less problems down the road. Okay. So once we're comfortable with the data, we've answered all our questions, then the next step is to just dive right in and start looking at the data itself, right? So I'm going to go back to our 311 data, and I'm going to just view the data. And it's going to show us the data. So there's two situations here. The first option that we're faced with is this thing called the exploration canvas. This is a new feature of the open data platform, and it's meant to be more interactive. There's a different version called the grid view, which I'll show you just because some of you who've worked with this may be more familiar with that. So let's just skip this for now, and I'll go back to the grid view. And this grid view is basically a tabular view, right? This is looking at this like you would look at a spreadsheet in Excel, for example, or a spreadsheet in Google Sheets. So the data is organized in rows and columns, right? Every row for this data set is a 311 service request. There are over 32 million of them. And then every column is another variable, right? These are attributes of those service requests, right? So that's the way the data is organized. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of data here, right? 32.5 million. It's usually a good idea. It's a best practice to try to filter the data, right? Presumably, we don't need all this data, right? Maybe we're only looking for certain service request types, or only from a certain agency, or maybe we're looking for a certain time period. If that's the case, then we should go ahead and filter the data rather than have to work with, all 32 million. So I'm going to start by doing that. I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change this to complaint type. I want to do this just to sort of keep it relevant, right? I know there's been a lot of attention recently in the media and the press from the mayor about rats. So I figured we would start off by looking at rodent complaints, right? So a couple ways we can do this. We can use some operators. The default is meaning equals, right? So we can say complaint type equals rodent, or another more generic way to do that is to use this contains operator. And I'm just going to say contains the word rodent. And while this is spinning, anybody want to guess how many happened since 2010? In the chat, take a guess, take a wild guess. How many rodent complaints going back to 2010? Wow, 1 million. We really have a rat problem, huh? Let's see. I don't think it's going to be 1 million. All right, I probably should have done it by date first. It's probably going to be quite a few. All right, while that's spinning, I'm going to add a new condition for the date. So I'm going to say created date. And again, because this is a date field now, we have different operators, right? We can say a specific date, or we can say, is it before a certain date or after a certain date or in between two dates? So let's just do it this year. Let me ask you again, how many since the beginning of the year? That should be a much smaller number, right? How many rodent complaints since the beginning of the year? 3,300. All right, so it's actually 7,154. So there's 7,154 rodent complaints since the beginning of the year. Now, I just want to pause for a second just to make sure everybody's with me here, and just to show you how I did that, right? So over here on the right-hand side, we have the option to add our criteria, right? How do we want to filter this data? How do we want to make a subset of it? And the first thing I chose was to filter it by complaint type, right? And I chose complaint type. The complaint type contains the word rodent, right? And if you look over here in this column, right, all we see is the word rodent, right? So those are all the rodent complaints. Now that's slightly different from the description, right? If we scroll over here, right, the descriptor is more detailed, right? Mouse sighting, rat sighting. It doesn't say what type, right? It just says, you know, various things, right? And then the other thing that I did was, so that was one filter, and then I added another filter. So I said, in addition to just rodents, let's look at only calls after a certain date or complaints after a certain date. So to do that, I used this created date column, right? And then I chose the operation is after, and I chose a specific date, right? So I chose is after January 1st of this year. And then once I did that, right, we went down from 32 million. By applying those two filters, we went from 32.5 million down to 7,154. So that's really helpful, right? Now I'm going to talk about ways that we can use the open data platform to visualize, but for some of you, this might be what all you want to do in the open data platform. Right now, you want to take this data and you want to bring it somewhere else, in which case there's this export menu option, right? And there's a number of things that we can export this as, right? So if we want to export this to a file and save it locally, there's several options: CSV, JSON, XML. So a number of different options. CSV is just plain text. CSV stands for comma separated value. So if you're using things like SAS or SPSS or Tableau, Excel, right, CSV is a pretty standard option. There are open APIs that we can use. SODA stands for Socrata Data Analytics, I believe. And this is a way to connect to this, using code, right? So if you or your team uses Python or some other coding language and you want to access it directly, you can use the API. There's also this OData ability to access the data. So these are OData stands for open data. These are endpoints. So if you use tools like Microsoft Power BI or Tableau, you can connect directly to the data using these endpoints. And a little beyond the scope of this conversation, but you just sort of copy and paste these endpoints into those tools. But by far the most common way to do this is downloading it locally to a file that you're going to use in Excel or something like that. So lots of options there. And then, that would create a file that contains these, approximately 7,000 rows, and then you could open it up in Excel or whatever other tool that you wanted to. So that's filtering in open data. We talked about organizing it into columns and rows, and how we can use different categories or fields to sort the data, exporting it, right? So let's jump back now and talk about visualize. So I'm going to click on this visualize and launch new visualization. And the tool, the platform has some really easy to use tools for creating visuals, which, for those of us that aren't, Power BI experts or Tableau experts or even Excel experts, we don't need to use them, right? We can just use the data within the platform and create some basic visualizations that we can use to answer our question. So there's a couple of approaches to this. I'll just do something real easy, right, and just show you by borough, right? So this creates. I chose the terminology is a little different here. They ask us to choose a dimension, and what a dimension really is it's a column, right? And by dimension, it means how do you want to slice the data, or how do you want to view the data, right? So I want to slice this by borough. So I want to see the complaints by borough. And it creates this bar chart. Up here are my chart options, right? I could choose a pie chart, for example, but I think a bar chart is probably a better visualization for this. And we can see, by borough, what the number of 311 service requests are, right? So we can see that Brooklyn has the most 311 service requests, right? About 9.5 million, for example, right? If we hover over it, it's actually 9.6 million records, right? So that's great. But again, this data may be too voluminous. So maybe we want to start adding some filters. So the filter functionality is included in this visualization tool. So I'm going to choose add filter. And we'll do something a little bit different now. Instead of rats, since it's really cold out, let's look at heat. But let's just make sure let's do year-to-date heat complaints, for example. Or maybe we'll go back. Let's go back. Let's change this to let's maybe try to do the heating season, for example. So we're on March 15th. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Let's go back to, I think heat season starts in October, right? October of each year, October 1st. And then we'll change this, 10/01/2022 to 3/15/2023, right? So that's heating season, right? And that will go ahead and search the data, filter the data, and hopefully narrow it down from millions to some number less. I'm going to go ahead and add another filter for type. And I'll do contains the word heat. Oh, maybe you didn't like that.
Oh, I know you took.
Doug, I think in the date, you might have captured 2002 by accident.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. Good catch.
After you get here for a while, I'll call Shirley. She's going to explain to you the answer to your 3 questions. We'll see it in the email. Somebody wants to do 3 things. Can't do it. Listen, partnership.
Okay, 2 things.
Let me just clear all and reset this. So I'll be honest, I'm glad this is sort of chugging along here, because it just goes to show that this data is really big, right? 32 million records is a lot of information. So, especially if you're creating a download file, that could take some time. So it's always a good idea, like I said, it's sort of a best practice to try to filter the data when appropriate. If you're not going to be looking at, the entire data set, it's a good habit, getting a good habit of filtering the data.
I wrote for this also. Show you.
Try and
My call's getting better, thank you.
see if this
I
works.
got a lot of snow. I'm going to do the notes like tomorrow, so I had to shovel over. It's going to be nice to work tomorrow since we could. Well, no.
All right, let's try something else here. Let's use a different query altogether. Let's try to search this by agency, and we'll choose HPD. And HPD is Housing Preservation and Development.
And hey, Doug, if this link is actually taking a bit with refreshing, sometimes I like to either refresh the entire page or just clone the tab and start fresh,
Okay,
just in case it gets stuck.
yep. So let's try that. All right, let's just do, how about this? Let's try year to date. We won't get so fancy. Let's just do this year. And we'll add our filter for complaint type. There we go, heat and hot water. Okay, so now we have our heat and hot water complaints for the entire year. And we could filter this further. Again, if you wanted to look at this by zip code or borough, maybe we could do something like that, incident zip. Anybody in the Bronx, maybe? Anybody a Yankee fan? A couple of Yankee fans out there. Okay, Yankee Stadium is in zip code 10451. Thought I saw it. There's 461. Guess there's no heat complaints near Yankee Stadium. I thought I saw it. All right, well, it doesn't matter. We'll just choose 457. Oh, I have it already in there. Okay, let's try that. And, again, we can choose a dimension for our, let's say, incident address. So this gives us a pretty detailed view now, right? So now we're looking at specific addresses, right, for a specific zip code, right, for heat and hot water complaints this year, right? So this address, 751 Girard Avenue, has had 169 service requests for heat this year, right? So 750 Grand Concourse has 51, right? But clearly the big one is 751 Girard Avenue, right? So clearly, if you're a resident in that building, you're not happy with the heat situation. So again, lots of information, right? Different filters, different dimensions that we're looking, and different ways to visualize this. This is all within the portal itself, right? All within the open data portal. We didn't need to go outside. We didn't need to use Tableau or anything like that. It's all built-in functionality. And again, as you can see across the top, the most common types of charts are available, right? There's bar charts, pie charts, line charts, right? You can do dual axis or combo charts. There's even mapping capabilities if the data supports it, right? If you have a location column in your data, it can generate a map. So there's lots of functionality built into the portal, and you never really even need to leave it if you don't want. Okay, so let me just do a check on time here. Okay, so we talked about filters. I mentioned the dimensions, right? That's how we want to slice our data. That's really what's going to drive the visualization. Also, there's different options, depending on the chart type. For example, in this pie chart, we can specify the number of slices we want to show. That again, if you want to filter out, data that's null, for example, that's all pop. Again, best practice is filter, like Kay mentioned. The system isn't perfect, so be patient. You might have to refresh your browser to sort of start with a clean slate. That's good advice. It happens to the best of us, so don't get too frustrated if things like that happen. Okay, so I mentioned maps. The 311 data set does have a location column built into it, so it can create maps based on that. In this case, we're looking at 1 day's 311 complaints for the city, so we can view that visually in the form of a map. Again, this is just another set of filters. Right now, we're looking at DOT for a given time period. And again, we're just visualizing now. Before, we were looking at address, incident address. This is complaint type, for example, right? So you can see, the various types of service requests that DOT is responsible for, right? Street conditions, street lights, traffic signals, street signs, right? Lots of sort of subcategories within for DOT. Okay, wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about tools that use open data. And this is important because, listen, not everybody's a data scientist, not everybody's an expert, not everybody's going to be able to massage or manipulate the data. But the good news is that there are people out there that have already done this, right? Whether it's organizations like BetaNYC and advocacy groups like that, other public institutions, right? The Vision Zero campaign, for example, agencies like city planning, they leverage this data already. We should, instead of reinventing the wheel, we should stand on the shoulders of giants and leverage what's already been created. So there's on the nyc.gov webpage, there's the link here, nyc.gov/maps, has this gallery of maps that leverage open data in one form or another. Different sort of themes here, right? There's the vaccine finder, mitigation action map, the broad NY city map, right? These focus on a wide variety of things, but the common thing is that they all leverage open data. These were developed by city agencies. Feel free to browse the gallery, take a look. And if you're interested, most of them, have links to the data sets themselves. So you can, go take a look at those as well. One example is from the Department of City Planning. It's called the Population Fact Finder. It leverages data from not only locally at the city level, right? The maps are local, but the data is collected by the U.S. Census Bureau, which constitutes open data too, just at the federal level. It uses the decennial census as well as the American Community Survey, which is a rolling survey that happens that is conducted by the Census Bureau. And you can use this to find out the demographics in your neck of the woods, right? What's going on near where you live or work, what the population is and how it's changing and things like that. So this is a really powerful tool. It's a good overview of demographics in the city. Another application from city planning is called Zola. It's related to zoning and land use, right? So you can see what the zoning status is. This is particularly important if you're a property developer or a real estate developer. You can see what's going on as it relates to zoning in your neighborhood. There is also on the open data platform a list of projects in the open data project gallery, and these again leverage open data. They're created by the general public, individuals, advocacy groups, things like that, right? Here's some examples here. There's one based on the squirrel census, from 2018, if you're interested. I believe there's one related to the tree census, which was recently updated. So, again, a wide spectrum of applications based on different themes. This is a useful one, I think. This one is the boundaries map and was created by our partner BetaNYC. Let me just jump over to it. So in this application, you can just type in an address. 695 Park Avenue in Manhattan, right? And it tells you all the related zones, right? So it tells you what community district you're in, what police precinct you're in, what sanitation district you're in, right? So all of this stuff that, as a resident, you may or may not know, right? It's helpful information, if you wanted to, attend a community board meeting, you might not know what community board you're in, right? So this is a good place to start. Or if you wanted to, reach out to your local police precinct about how to file a complaint report, but you don't know what precinct you're in, right? This is a good application, right? So it takes your address and it returns all of these different districts, right? Even things related to elections, right? Your state Senate, your state assembly, your congressional district, right? So all of this is useful information as a resident, right? So this is a great example. Again, it's all based on open data. So that's the boundaries map from BetaNYC. Again, if you haven't seen it, take a look. It's a great app. Just some other ones, Data to Go, WeGov NYC, the NYC connector. Excuse me. It was mentioning restaurant violations was his favorite data set. Well, it's George Ho's favorite data set too. Apparently, he's created a web page where you can search for selected restaurants, right? So you just go to this website and type in a name, and it will give you a list and what their violations are, right? So this is all based on that data set. So again, somebody leveraging open data in a productive, right, positive way. Let's see. I mentioned the street tree census. Somebody did an interactive visualization based on that, right? So this is fun ways to look at that. How's my driving, right? Parking and camera violations. If anybody's got a heavy foot here on the call, enter in your plate number and you can see what your history is, right? One thing, let me just show you one of my favorites. NYC Then and Now. This is a really cool app that OTI developed, the Office of Technology and Innovation. And it has information or layers of photographs, aerial photographs for all of these years. Most recently, it's about every 2 years, these images get updated. But we can look at older data as well, right? So here we are in the most recent imagery, right? So I'm gonna zoom in to the area of northern Manhattan, Marble Hill and the Bronx, right? And we can look at this in context, in a historical context, right? So anybody ever, where am I, 2018, and let's look at 1924. So I can use this swipe tool to swipe between 2018 aerial photography and aerial photography going all the way back to 1921, right? So that's really cool, right? This area, turn this off for a second. This area is actually a target on our map, but in 1921, it was, 1924, I'm sorry. It was something totally different. Anybody want to guess what that structure is there in 1924? See where we have this parking lot, and then there's this structure here in 1924. Any history buffs here? Oh, that's a good guess. Old Yankee Stadium. Good guess. Not quite though. Let me zoom in a little more. It's actually something called a velodrome. Any cycling fans out there? Anybody, any bike riders? So in 1924, they used to have bike races there, right? And this is this looped track that it's banked, so they could, reach high speeds as they banked around these around the track. It was made of wood, actually. There's actually, I still think there's some events in the Olympics on this. I'm not sure though. But yeah, so interestingly, how the city has changed in the last 100 years, right? We used to go watch people ride bikes around the track. We don't do that anymore, I guess. Also, somebody told there is one. Yolanda said there's still one in Queens. So yeah, so that's again all based on open data, right? So this imagery is considered open data. It's not searchable and filterable like we were looking at on the open data platform, but the city does publish this, and you can download this imagery and access this imagery through a number of applications if you're so interested. Interestingly, right, these parks were still the same too, right over there in the northern tip of Manhattan, right? The ball fields are still there, right? That's the Columbia Columbia football stadium, right? So they were playing football in 1924 there as well. So that's fun to see, right? Okay, so I'm gonna pause here. Let me jump back to the slides. Anybody have any questions? Okay, were there any questions that I wasn't paying attention to in the chat that I need to touch on here?
Hey, excuse me. Hey, Doug. Someone asked about visualization, about exporting. To help you with that is being that it was a little bit clunky today. I managed to do a little bit of visualizing myself, and I got it at a point where I could show someone what to expect when it comes time to saving and exporting and sharing a graph or a map that they made. I could share my screen real quick.
Yeah, let me stop sharing and you take over.
Okay. So just sharing for a second. You should see my page here. So the difference is you don't need to be logged in or signed up for an account on the Open Data Portal to use some of the tools. However, when you do sign up and create an account, you actually get some more privileges and some more abilities, namely that you can go into 311, create what I have here is a top 10 of the biggest requests. Interestingly enough, it's also using a relative date. So this will update every day, according to what happened yesterday, right? In the filter over here. But you would get the opportunity to save whatever you want to call this as, and then the ability to go ahead and share would pop up once it's associated with your account. I'm not going to make this real for my account, but if you go ahead and sign up for an account, and I'll also drop that link in the chat, you can create your visualization, your maps, and then you can share. By sharing, I also mean that the portal actually conveniently lets you get some HTML, so you can embed a map, an interactive map, something that's zoomable onto a website or to share with other people as well. And it'll be powered by your account. So just answering that question and letting you know how to get a little further in that. And just checking the chat, see if there's any questions. Oh, okay, cool. So I'll stop sharing there and back to you, Doug. Any other questions? Feel free to type in the chat. Happy to answer some questions. We also got some time. I could walk through something else.
Yeah, if there's anything specific you want to see or you're not clear on, just we're happy to answer anything. So
yep, let us know. And as I mentioned, I said I would I'm going to drop in that link in the chat so people can sign up for an account. So definitely one way to stay involved here.
So Kay, you gonna jump in here or do you want me to keep going with this?
I could grab it from you if you want, and then you could just move a slide over.
Sure.
Yeah. So definitely one big way to ask any other questions that might come up for you after this call is to go to the Open Data Portal. You saw in the top nav, Doug was able to show you what kind of data we have by clicking the data button, and it showed you data organized by popularity, by agency, by different category of business. That's one way. But in that same navigation bar, you also have the contact us. And when you click on that, and the link is here, nyc.gov/ask-open-data, you'll get taken to a form where you could provide us some basic information. You can ask questions specifically about a data set or just a general question. This is actually a live monitored form, monitored by myself and my team. So you have real people behind this. And what we do is we route your questions, especially based on open data, to agencies that we believe will have the best idea on how to answer your question, especially if it's about a specific data set, is usually maintained by someone. So we'll make sure we get responses to your questions within 2 weeks. And definitely just want to show you that. So for one, just pasting in for everyone, the sign up link to the portal. You can create an account. Then you also have the link for asking us questions on open data. Doug, feel free to go over to the next slide. All right. And so some of our events, I spoke a little bit about Open Data Week, week-long festival. Thank you for joining us for this session. There's going to be many more events for the rest of the week, and I actually want to make sure you guys are aware of that. So here you go. At your leisure, you can pop open a tab, have a look, and be able to sign up for some other events. Just today, this morning, the 311 team actually had a panel where they were able to answer people's questions very specifically about how they gather the data. So there's things like that coming up. Almost every morning, my team actually has a coffee session in the morning where we're able to answer your questions. So yeah. School of Data is going to be our highlight at the end of the week. On Saturday, all day, you can plan your day out and do multiple things and kind of curate your own journey for learning. So highly recommend that. And with BetaNYC, they also cover government tech talks with Beta Bagels. And we also have our Code for America, Day of Hacking. BetaNYC will be able to get you some more information about that. Next slide will show how to reach out to BetaNYC. We have beta.nyc/links. Get in touch with them via Slack. They also got newsletters that they update regularly, Facebook, and then a calendar of events to be a part of. So yeah, lots to do, lots of ways to stay in touch, get involved in different ways. Yeah. And next slide is fine. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you all for your time. Thank you all for joining. And thank you, Doug. Any parting words? Want to give some thanks to the crowd as well?
Yeah, one thing I always try to say in these sessions, sometimes people have this, they think that, the data is going to magically answer all their questions. And I just sort of offer this word of caution that sometimes the data you're looking for just doesn't exist, right? All this data is yours as taxpayers, right? It is open data. But keep in mind, as data analysts or data scientists, or even just concerned citizens, that while the data is yours, it wasn't necessarily created for you, right? So this data is meant to support, city operations. So it has a different purpose, right? It was created for something that you might not be intending it. So just because the data, isn't there or doesn't exist, doesn't mean, the city's not doing their job or something like that, right? This is very specific data, and sometimes it doesn't always do what we want it to do, but that's okay, right? It's still really valuable, and it's still really helpful, and it's still your data to leverage and yours to work with to see how the city's function. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for your time and your feedback. Don't forget to fill out the surveys. That's important stuff for the group. So
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time.
Yes, thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. Yeah, and by the way, that survey will be coming after the call and email. You're gonna have all of the links that we've been sharing in a nice, convenient place as well. I just shared it in the chat just so you can have a quick look through, but it's coming all
too, right?
Yeah. Yep. The slides will be coming too, definitely, so you can follow along. In the slide deck, we've done some work to annotate a little bit more, so that way it's kind of like you have our voice there while we're not there, and you can practice and go over some of the pieces that might have been slow on your own, and yeah, be able to make a map on your own as well. So that's coming to you in email. Again, this has been recorded, so you can also have that as well. So all of that coming to you in a nice, neat package in email. No worries there. All right. Thank you all. Thank you.